going. All right. Hi, everyone. You're listening to the Blockchain Socialist podcast. This time, I'm doing a little bit of an experiment and I'm doing also recording the video of my conversation. And for today, I'm going to be talking to Sam Delesque, who is the founder of OASA and Traditional Dream Factory, or TDF, which is an eco village based in Portugal that I was recently at, where we did a bunch of really cool things, including planting, I believe it was over 700 trees, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me here.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for coming. Yeah, so I was at TDF. What was it now? Like about a month ago, and I wanted to do an interview with you, but do video because I just bought a camera and I'm trying to like figure out how to do more video stuff. But I'm kind of still figuring it out, and I completely fucked up and realized that my flight was a day earlier than I thought it was. So I had to like in a rush just kind of leave the village late at night so I can make my flight the next morning. I made my flight, but I was still late to the place that I needed to go to because the first flight was delayed. It was a mess. But anyways, um, yeah, maybe Sam, if you want to give a bit of an introduction before we get into what TDF is, and we'll talk about that in a bit, and I'll show some clips of kind of like my and our experience being there. But yeah, who are you, and what got you to this point to found something like TDF?
Oh, thank you. So yeah, my name is Sam. I'm French and Danish originally. I grew up mostly in the south of France, and then I moved to New York just after my studies, and I lived in New York for like 7 years. And basically, I come from a tech background. I worked about 10 years, different startups, corporates, and so on. And yeah, I grew up in a national park in the south of France, so nature has always been close to my heart. And I studied photography when I was younger. So
Wow.
I also had a little stunt in the photography industry, uh, but didn't really find my way there. And so yeah, basically I combine, yes, an interest in technology with nature and arts. And this is a little bit what I've been working in the last few years, trying to create spaces for digital nomads and for humans in general to be able to thrive while leaving a positive trace on nature.
Nice. Which national park was it, if I can if I can ask? I've been through the south of France a bit, and the national parks there are incredible.
It's in Lozère. It's north of Montpellier in the south of France.
Okay, haven't been there. Yeah.
It's a beautiful
Um.
chestnut forest.
Cool. Nice. So yeah, I thought when we were speaking in at TDF, it was really interesting to hear about your like kind of trajectory and experience having worked in tech in a place like New York, which in having a corporate life as some people may have had or may have now, and then choosing to essentially get away from that and move towards something that you felt was more, I guess, meaningful for yourself and aligned with what you wanted to do.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's I I realized quite quickly when I was in New York that I wanted to be closer to nature, and also I started just working remotely about around 2017, and so I had the freedom to live wherever I wanted to. I was working remotely for a company in Boston, and so I just started traveling around and kind of living that digital nomad life. Um,
Mm. Before it was popular.
and yeah, one of
Really.
yeah, I mean, I guess it started a while ago, digital nomadism, but it definitely started a bit before COVID. Um,
Mm.
and basically starting that lifestyle and living in places like South Africa and Portugal I visited and Latin America and so on. Um, I mean, it's a rich life to be able to have that freedom to choose where you want to work from and where you want to live. Um, but also, you're a little bit at the mercy of the the short term real estate market because you're most likely renting spaces on Airbnb and so on. And so, first of all, like you're mercy of this market in terms of economics, but also in terms of ecological footprint. Like you're not able to decide how sustainable you want to live and so on. And in general, I think real estate has been detrimental to nature so far. We have like a lot of like shitty real estate developments all over the world where we're just completely destroying nature and putting up condos and putting up um, golf courses and rental estates and so on and so on. Um, and so I really wanted to try to reverse that and to see how we could actually use real estate as a force for good. And that's what crypto is doing with ReFi. It's like how can we use crypto as a force for good. But I was seeing like real estate as in tolls around the world is like the biggest market, pretty much, I think. And so how can we actually leverage this rental market to actually funnel funds towards conservation? So I got really interested in concepts like community land trust and how can we actually put something into the commons, distribute access to it, and actually being able to leave a positive trace for future generations. Um, yeah, and then I went down that rabbit hole around 5 years ago, and it's only going deeper.
Yeah, yeah. When you say that, it kind of makes me think it's like maybe a subversion of the current rental market to kind of that people do want to, I mean, have some amount of freedom of being able to move around and stay in places, but um, the kind of privatized approach that is most common is kind of like one that has oftentimes, if not most times, caused some amount of environmental damage or damage to like the locality in which it exists in because of like privatized housing.
Yeah, I think like the two of the big contributors to climate change is um, construction in general and also agriculture.
Mm.
It's like the separation from the places where we get our food from, and the fact that we have to ship it so far, and the, the loss of topsoil that modern farming practices are generating. It's like all of these practices cumulatively just mean that we are living in a degenerative civilization, and that has to come to an end if you want to have future generations being able to thrive on this planet. And yeah, it is kind of trying to look at the real estate model and see how can we actually turn this around and make this a force for good rather than a force for more destruction, more extraction. Um, and and with that, it's like, yeah, how can we actually measure this impact and like how do we actually do that? And that's a little bit what guided me back into crypto. Originally, back in New York, I wasn't completely sold on the idea of using crypto for my project, even though
Mm.
um, the idea had been floated, but initially I just thought that it added like too much complexity on top of something already complex, like building a village, which already has a lot of components from like permaculture design, construction, engineering, um, social coordination, like all of these different layers of things that you need to do well. Um, but in the end, I think crypto can also, well, it has proved like with the ReFi movement that basically it can be global tool for coordinating for good and for actually leaving a positive trace. And so, yeah, I think what we're all building here together is how can we create this nature-backed economy? And the interpretation of OASA of this is how can we create regenerative real estate that actually leave a positive impact on the land? And so reversing this effect of like, let's destroy a piece of virgin forest in order to put in some condos. But instead of saying, how can we actually take this piece of virgin forest, actually implement a economic model that still makes it attractive and viable, but while conserving it for future generations. And so actually being able to preserve all the ecosystem benefits that are stored in this ecosystem.
Yeah, we'll definitely talk more about OASA and kind of like the grander vision of this. But I thought maybe we can talk a bit now about TDF, Traditional Dream Factory. So yeah, would you want to maybe give us a little bit of an introduction to what TDF is?
Yeah, so TDF is the first prototype that we're building. It's a regenerative village in Portugal. It's set on an old poultry farm, chicken farm. that was built in 1970, and it was used for about 35 years, and then it was abandoned. And then for 15 years, it was just used for town parties in the town where we were, and it just was this big abandoned building. And so we came in 2020, and decided to it was be the perfect place to basically also create a template for regeneration for this specific area. And so how can we repurpose something like this old agricultural building that's just been sitting abandoned, that has more of a negative value than a positive by sitting there, um, and trying to create something really positive around it. So trying to imagine the circularity aspect of creating a regenerative village. How can we actually influence positively the whole village and neighborhood that we are sitting within? And trying to look at the different scopes of regeneration and how can we build more capacity for regeneration. And in the particular context of TDF, it's 25 hectares of land. It's two properties. We acquired the first one with the buildings, and then the second one we have the option to buy. And we're hoping to do that early next year, so that we can start basically the bigger farming operations and start to expand into a full-on village. And the vision for it is we have the poultry farm, which is turning into co-living space for around 30 people, more or less. And then on the expansion lands, we have 10,000 square meters urbanizable, which means that we can build 10 to 20 houses. And on top of that, we have like different other kind of accommodation and so on. And the goal is to basically build a whole village, so including an orchard, regenerative farm, co-housing development, some tiny houses, a democratic school, also teaching around permaculture and so on. And this co-living space, which includes wellness and work facilities to be able to stay productive with co-working spaces, but also maker space and industrial kitchen, being able to transform food products on the ground, and trying to have all the tools available to bring this circularity to be able to launch new products from the things that we grow on the land. And just creating an environment that induces more human creativity and more collaboration. And it's an experiment, and we are also experimenting with tokenizing timeshare access to real estate. And with that tokenization also comes governance. So there's quite a lot of pieces that we're prototyping out with. But the main things is like, how do we live together? How do we grow food together? And how do we create an environment that encourages for more human creativity?
Yeah, I think that was a pretty comprehensive a summary. I think uh, maybe to like to share with people who are listening. Like I stayed in one of the, I guess, a tents. I want to call it a yurt, but I think it's a tent technically.
Yeah, it's a glamping tent. Yeah.
A glamping tent. I stayed in one of the tents that was like inside, this big building that I assume was like wherever they stored like grain or something like that. Looked like a grain storage type of building maybe in the past. Um, and Yeah, I was there for about a week, and we basically did a bunch of tree planting. We did a bunch of, and then as well at the same time, we did a bunch of conversations and talks and whatever else on ReFi, on regenerative finance, and sort of related that to kind of broader missions that various people had who were there during the week long event, which I think was about maybe like 50 people, I want to say, more or less.
Yeah, I think on average we had around 50 people.
Yeah. And yeah, but I think what was really interesting about that experience for me at least was that not everybody was like a crypto person. Not everyone was like a crypto geek, and like our conversations were not like I felt not like circular that sometimes kind of crypto things can be. And instead we had a lot of people from the outside that I think were already at TDF, who help you in the actual permaculture parts, in the like planning for the architecture, for engineering, the people who also cooked. They were all part of like the conversations, and then kind of like broadly, crypto was like something on the side that maybe we thought about as something to help coordinate all these things, but it wasn't sort of like maybe mm, the only thing at the very least that we were focused on, which I really appreciated.
Hmm. Yeah, I guess TDF kind of brings this blend of like regenerators or naturalist people that are into land, and together with the crypto people, the engineers, the data scientists, and so on, and also the artists and so on. And so, yeah, it is kind of this convergence of different profiles of people. And yeah, I really love the ReFi week for that because it was actually putting ReFi in practice and actually
Mhm.
planting trees. Like you said, we planted over 700 trees that week, um, which helped like setting up all of our windbreaks and like turning the market garden that we have into a food forest. Um, and yeah, I mean, that's really kind of the intersection that we want to be in, like to create this kind of playground that, um, whether you are a crypto nerd and you want to like create some kind of protocol and coming with some digital tools, you can come and you can actually see it in action in the real world. Where, yeah, like you said, I think a lot of kind of crypto projects tend to be a bit stuck in maybe uh, designing systems rather than seeing what actually look like in the real world. So yeah, that was
Mhm.
definitely a beautiful moment to getting together and yeah, having different perspectives on what does regeneration mean and how can we work together.
Yeah, yeah. And just to give maybe some extra context, just like to imagine for the listeners as well, and I'll put some video. But the uh, TDF is it's like it's an eco village essentially with the type of toilets where after you do your business, you got to put in you got to is it sawdust? I think that you put it into into the bowl, I guess, into the hole. Um, and yeah, you're pretty exposed to nature more or less, and I think which is um, for I guess maybe the average kind of uh, digital worker, it's not something that you're normally exposed to, or it's not something that you like think about a lot because maybe you are in the office or you're at home, protected from the elements. Sometimes I think we kind of forget that weather is happening outside and you have to adjust for that. And yeah, it rained a little bit at a certain point, so things were a bit muddy. But it was all like it was fun. It was being able to um, I don't know, have both like highly uh, technical conversations and like digital things about digital topics while also like being like I don't know, for being crude, like being like a caveman and being like exposed to the elements at the same time, you know?
Yeah, it was definitely a very rainy week. So you had like the most rainy week and it was cold as well. In Portugal, you have this phenomenon where it kind of gets cold around the time, and that was like the time when we had a lot of rains. And then actually after this, it became beautiful weather again. We had a lot of sun, and now it's kind of nice. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely a place. It's still a village being built, so we don't have the full on fancy accommodation that we have in the plans yet. We do have all the architectural and engineering plans to, yeah, to have everything that you would expect from a like a modern co-living space coming soon. So we're hoping to raise some capital here in Q1 to be able to start the execution of that. But basically, yeah, at this point, it's glamping tents with, well, some indoor glamping tents, some outdoor glamping tents. We set up a kitchen and all of these things. But in the future, this could be like full on like suites and studios and houses and tiny houses and yeah, pools and so on. So there's a lot more infrastructure to be built, but right now it's still like in the early days and kind of in the builder phase. So it's I guess it's also nice to being able to see it from that perspective because then when you come back in a few years, oh yeah, this is how you used to be and so on. So
Yeah, yeah. It's getting there. It's getting there.
that's
Um, it was interesting talking to a lot of the people who have been helping you over the past, at least the past few months, I guess, on like building out the plan for the garden that we were also helped with, and the food forest, and um, as well, I spoke to the guy who helped like set up like the internet system. So yeah, so it was very interesting to have those types of conversations that were not like token related, I guess.
Mhm.
Um, But so TDF, it's situated in this village, or like TDF is a village, but then it's within this Portuguese village of, I believe it's Abelas,
Abela, yeah.
Abela. Um, so yeah, and I was just wondering, how do you guys kind of go about engaging with the community of Abela, since it was previously, like you said, it was like the place where they partied since it was abandoned.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most recurring questions. One of the main ways, I mean, to basically preserve this cultures that they had. Like they do a lot of like big town parties and so on. So we try to keep that, and so we throw events once in a while that are targeted towards the locals. And so we host the local festas, and we bring the local musicians to play, and sometimes we grill sardines and stuff for them. And then what we did this year is we built an outdoor cinema, and so we're hosting movie nights every week. That was also quite popular, and that was bringing more of the youth as well from the village. Um, One of the ideas that we have around how do we actually um, broaden our impact is like, yeah, by instead of like telling others how to do things, we really want to be able to lead by example. So that's why we're not really going out there and doing too much integration with the local farmers, because we first want to prove it for ourselves and to be able to have something to show. But they're already starting to take notice. And so, for example, the first year we were growing potatoes in a very permaculture way with a lot of mulching and so on. And our potatoes were growing and thriving, and our neighbors were growing it in a very traditional Portuguese way. It was exposed topsoil, and all the potatoes thrived. And so at the local town party, like the locals were asking us about it. And I think it's just like a nice example of how we can create more integration in terms of how do we actually work the land together, like taking into consideration all the knowledge that they have from all the forms of farming that has been norm of the last century. But at the same time, we also have to move towards something a little bit different. We have to move to farming that includes much more agroforestry, having many more trees to retain more water in the soil. Um, but yeah, for example, we have a shepherd who is taking care of sheep on the rest of the lands as well, and been there for probably generations. Like he lived in Abela his whole life. He's managing 300 hectares around the town of Abela. He has, I think, 300 sheep, and yeah, and he basically also built a couple of lakes, water retention lakes, and this is exactly what we want to build next year. So it was kind of funny to find that out back in September. So we went out and visited his lakes with him, and you have just these kind of nice integrations around how can we actually optimize for water conservation, how can we actually get more out of the land and put more back into the land. And I think, yeah, as we will be scaling up the farming operation over the next year and really bringing like a full-fledged orchard and food forest, I think that will really become an inspiration point for a lot of locals, and hopefully we'll see them starting to replicate the systems on their own lands.
Mm. What I appreciate about this kind of approach is that you are integrating into kind of like the community, rather than being a kind of like, I don't know, invading force that, hey, we're buying this land and we're going to make it our own little, I don't know, digital nomad bubble that you know and then like not sort of engage with the wider community. Um and so one of the things that you've mentioned before is this concept of community land trust. So, community land trust. I was wondering if you can maybe explain a bit what that is. To me, it feels like a kind of uh, a serious alternative to sort of standard private property ownership of land or of real estate.
hmm Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, a community land trust, or like land trust in general, it's a way to basically put land into a legal vehicle that has a mandate to have certain conservation values on it. So, if you look at Central Park in New York, for example, that's a very well functioning land trust that's been established hundreds of years ago, and which is still standing because it has a strong legal recognition and a strong protection of it. Land trusts don't exist everywhere. They don't exist in Portugal. So what we tried to do was kind of to emulate the structure of a land trust. So we have a Swiss-based nonprofit, which basically serves as our land trust. It's the ultimate land owning entity. Although the land in Portugal is owned through an SPV, a special purpose vehicle, which is a company in Portugal. But then this company is then owned by the nonprofit in Switzerland. And so by enforcing certain principles on the land, like in our case, we wrote the regenerative land stewardship principles that you can find on the OASA website, and basically gives us some kind of framework for within which we want to live. And I think this is really quite critical to think about when we think about how we actually preserve lands for the future, because it's not about preserving it for, say, 1 month or 1 year. It's really long-term processes. And if you chop down a forest, it's going to take centuries before this forest would be back to its original capacity in terms of carbon sequestration, water sequestration, and so on and so on. So we really have to work with legal systems that can stretch over a longer period of time. And so I think, well, land trust is one of the most interesting structures to be able to do that. There's other forms of legal ways that you can get around it and that you can do it. For example, in some places you can put in easements directly on a land deed, so that you can put in certain ecological conservation measures. But the general idea is that, basically you create some kind of land protection rules that you enforce on a land, and that these rules will stay for the future, regardless of how you organize, let's say, what you're building on the land, or like who the people are on the land, and so on. The idea is that we can enforce these rules for future generations. And so within our OASA land stewardship principles, for example, we have rules like 50% of the land is to be rewilded. Why do we do that? Well, one of the big aspects of climate change is we are seeing a massive biodiversity collapse. We already lost 70% of all mammals over the last 40 years, and it's even worse for when you look at insects and so on. But so there's a movement for the Half Earth movement, and the idea is to preserve 50% of the globe as nature, because this is what's required to actually being able to maintain the level of biodiversity that we have today. And so it's just a little bit of a nudge to that. And some of the other principles that we have is no single-use plastic, no tilling, and all these kind of best practices that you would find in a organic farm, but also taking it way further in terms of actually creating production rules that just a bit more pioneering and that are more based on nature as something that deserves to have its own right, rather than something that we're just trying to extract from. And so by creating this kind of baseline of land protection, then we can then organize a human that come on top of it and that want to live within this context. But because you already have this kind of base land protection, now what you have to agree on is more like things that actually matter to you as a human directly. So when you buy the token, you abide by the land stewardship principles, and then you get access rights to be able to live on those land and to be able to take part in that ecosystem. But you don't get the right to, for example, chop down the forest and build a golf course. That's not something that's part of the of what you're allowed to do. So it's kind of shifting this idea of ownership, as in the sense of ownership actually comes from the Roman law, and it's a right to use, the right to get the fruit of, and the right to destroy. That's literally like how you describe ownership, and that would apply to anything that you own. So back in the days when you had slaves, you had the right to do whatever you wanted to them. You could kill them. The same kind of applies to land today. I mean, there's certain things that national governments impose on your land in terms of what you can and cannot do. But largely, you're able to do whatever you want to do, and you're able to extract the value from it, to cut down all the trees and sell the timber, and to just leave a desolate place. So it's like this idea of how can we actually change the structure itself so that it leaves a positive trace, and so that it's not just all about extraction, but actually we're trying to leave something more positive for the next generation. So hopefully, over a generation of token holders that will be accessing the TDF lands, you'll see actually the land improving in quality, improving in biodiversity, in water retention, in food production, in capacity for humans to thrive and for nature to thrive as well.
Yeah, that was well said. I think yeah, to me, community land trusts are just I mean, it's a type of solution that that is interesting that there are allowances for within the already existing legal system or in some legal systems. It seems like you guys are able to kind of almost use regulatory arbitrage, but in a way to be able to create a community land trust rather than for like not paying taxes or something like that. Which is how it's normally used. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, it is something that I think when we're talking about the climate crisis is one of the like potential tools in a suite of tools that we can sort of use if we want to kind of um, start to create solutions ourselves or just like take the resources that we already have and just begin implementing them and start doing them in practice. So that's something I yeah, as well I appreciate. And then I think from what it sounds like to me when it comes to community land trusts, what potentially crypto brings is this mechanism or a platform or medium, a substrate, a protocol, whatever word you prefer to use, but a way to kind of like govern how you would use this amount of land, this community land trust,
Mhm.
since it is something that perhaps not every legal system is always able to like encompass every single potential like form of social organization that you may want, um, which can then, if you're always trying to do something within like legal boundaries, there may not be an amount of space for you to do the thing that you want to do. And so perhaps it sounds to me that crypto is something that brings uh, a certain it brings something innovative in that space as far as governance and as well thinking about a world that is that includes people who are digital nomads or who are more nomadic and who do want to like move around a bit. We live in a globalized society. It allows for a certain amount of maybe we can say liquidity for people to be able to like choose to govern or when is it like appropriate for them to govern or not to govern that isn't so rigid. Yeah.
Y- Yeah, exactly. I think like basically what crypto enables you to do is to encode certain utility. And I mean, when we talk about like we created a utility token because what the token gives you access to is actually the ability to book nights of stay. So the ability to spend your time, the ability to actually live at TDF. And so create like a direct like representation of this benefit, like living at TDF. We could have created a token for, say, the utility of eating at TDF or whatever other kind of services that you would want to consume within this ecosystem. But because the utility is what we're tokenizing, that enable us to take away this kind of broader sense of ownership, which comes with extraction and all these other things. So basically, by encoding into a platform the utility of like being able to live there, which is to us like the primary reason that you should want to come to the place anyway, is like um, we want you to be able to come and spend your time and to have a great time and to have access to all the means of production, access to high quality food, well nutritious food, and so on and so on. Um, but that's kind of how we decided to divide up the value of the space, so based on actually time spent in the space. And then obviously that comes with the second benefit, which is crypto enable us to also fundraise for this project, right? The idea is um, by doing this token, we can now issue some form of values that gives you an access right within the space, and then we can actually sell these rights and being able to raise the funding to develop the place or maybe to acquire more land and so on and so on. And this is very much a pioneering concept and something that hasn't been done at least like this in the past, and some things that we really want to pioneer and get more people to be on board with and to replicate. And this is a model that we're also encoding into the tech platform that we're building called Closer, which enables any regenerative village, co-living developers, and so on to being able to distribute access and governance rights on chain to their projects, while still being able to maintain this legal ownership in whatever forms that makes the most sense. So whether it's a community land trust or other shape. Um, and yeah, I think that's like that's really like the core of the ideas that we're trying to push for, is that we can use technology to coordinate around getting access to these spaces and how do we actually live in it, while being able to enforce certain rights for the land itself as well.
Mm. And how do you kind of think about the bridging between the physical space of TDF and like digital tokens that exist, in the digital ether? So I imagine that's like not necessarily like a simple bridge the gap.
hmm Yeah, I mean, we kind of came up with this very simple representation of one token being one night at TDF per year forever. So
Mm,
it created this like easy bridge between the digital token and its representation in the real life.
mm,
Um, it's still not super easy to understand, and like we're really used to, I just own this plot of land, so
right.
everything that government allows me to do, I can do it on this land. It's a it's a bit of a shifting in mentality, and so I think we have a lot of education to do around that, around actually valuing this, valuing time in a nature conservancy, while being able to yeah, still being able to demand all of the things that you would want. Like you probably want hot showers and toilets and co-working spaces and restaurant, kitchen, like all these kind of things, which I don't think we need to go back to caveman. I think you pointed to that at some point. Um, I think I think we don't really have that choice. No one is gonna make the choice to live completely carbon free by just not taking part in the global economy. I think we have to provide the tools for global citizens to being able to take part in an economy that's actually nature positive, while still providing them with competitive amenities. Like, so the goal is to compete with an apartment in the city or whatever other kind of lifestyle you're coming from, but being able to prove that we can actually provide you with that while giving you, while preserving nature in the process.
Yeah, it's like the, I mean the token as like one day or one night, you could say forever is an interesting. Um, it's like it requires a need to a bit break down what makes up property ownership as we conceptualize it generally, which, like you
Yeah,
said, it's usually like the ability to destroy, the ability to profit from, and I'm forgetting the third one now,
to use.
to use. So like yeah, so it's this idea of usufruct, of being able to like that you don't actually own something in perpetuity, like kind of like the platonic ideal of private property ownership is a very silly one because you know when you die you are not going to like your things don't go with you into the afterlife or whatever. It still exists in the world, and so there's a need to kind of to separate kind of like the separate rights that are included in private property ownership. And one of those rights that I've heard, I believe it was David Graeber mentioned, but is rarely mentioned when thinking about private property, is like the right to care for something. That is
Mhm.
something that is often sort of left out. But so this uh, model perhaps brings an alternative to something that is like pure private property ownership, or the flip side of like just rent and like paying rent to like live somewhere. It's somewhere in the messy in between of those things.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we define stewardship as the right to care for. and the right to get the fruit of. So you can still get access to the space, like all of these kind of things. Like you can still benefit from it in some ways. It's just that we are letting go of the ideas that I have the right to destroy it. That's the main thing that we want to get rid of,
Yeah.
that we don't identify with. And also like this idea of coding actually like a certain culture and a certain um, let's say values in terms of how do we want to actually make this land more beautiful and more able to serve life in general. So that kind of becomes encoded in the platform, right? And yeah, that's I think that's the beauty of what crypto can bring to this project, is that you can really encode whatever value you want behind these digital assets, much more granular than just ownership in itself. And yeah, and in our case, we basically built a technology that enables you to transition from ownership into stewardship.
Mhm. Yeah. And so I think of TDF as like one of these. There's like an eco village. Sometimes the kind of stereotype that I've heard about some eco villages is that they're very, I guess to put it like crudely, like anti-tech, or like it's like a space where they don't, no phones, no computers, no internet. Leave that all behind. We're all going to like return to the land and like whatever. TDF, I think, proposes slightly differently, where we are instead like consciously trying to choose how we use technology, or use it specifically for like the purpose of the goals um, behind TDF, essentially, which is to regenerate the land and using whatever technology is available to be able to accelerate that process. Um, and one of the things that you guys are doing, as far as the use of technology, and especially like advanced technology, is to measure the impact of the regeneration that you guys are working on at TDF.
hmm
So do you want to talk about a little bit about that and how you guys are approaching it?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like you said, yeah, I think the eco village movement as a whole has kind of been a little bit against technology, and sometimes what do you call it, like killing the baby in the baby water.
Throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Yeah.
Exactly. And so it's like and I think there's generally the same concept with money, right? I think the hippie movement from the 60s kind of broadly just declined money as like something that had like value, because like money was evil and technology is evil. But when you just label it like that, you're just cutting yourself from society. And so instead, what we're trying to do is to say, well, these things exist and they're not going to go away. And the only way to change their influence in the world is to actually lean into it and to try to change what they actually mean. And that is the premise of ReFi as a whole, right? Is we're trying to change what does money mean from something that's just about creating more growth into something that's actually creating more nature. At least that's what I would like to see with ReFi.
Mm.
And so yeah, so one of the things that we're doing is we're tracking the growth of our natural assets. So for example, we planted over 3,000 trees on the property. 2,000 of them are in our reforestation project. That reforestation project is being monitored by Open Forest Protocol, which means that we have our field agent that goes into the field, takes some photos of the trees, measures how the trees are growing, and then Open Forest Protocol connects that with data companies that have satellite providers and so on, provide them data so they can actually verify the work that we're doing, so that we can actually get a quantifiable number of how many tons of biomass are growing on our land, which means that we can know how many tons of carbon we sequestered from the atmosphere. And so that means that now we can actually measure our impact. We can know how many tons of carbon we're storing. We also want to slowly add biodiversity tracking. We're talking with companies like Simplex DNA, where we can take some water samples from the land in order to be able to see all of the species that are interacting with the space that we're creating. And yeah, the dream is that over time we can prove that we're actually leaving a positive trace, that we're actually regenerating that land. And in doing so, we want to be able to create an economic stream from those activities and being able to sell that impact to companies that have ESG requirements, or whatever other kind of carbon markets, biodiversity markets will emerge. It's still quite a nascent market opportunity. Like biodiversity credits don't even exist yet. Water credits don't exist yet. But that is a work that we really see us doing, because we see the village as being the right ecological and economical unit to actually do regeneration, because we don't believe in natural asset companies just traded on NASDAQ and that they're just going to own the whole forest around the world and extract the profits from forests doing their thing. But we see the villages where the stewards live and where the villages, the stewards can eat and where they sleep, and can actually have the cultural and the skills and knowledge to be able to care for land, and also the knowledge and so on about how do you actually track that impact and what does the land need and what does it mean to have a positive impact. And so by starting to track these metrics, carbon capture, biodiversity, water, and so on, you can start to create basically, a model for a regenerative village. And that does set us apart from other eco villages and so on, because we will actually have tangible data and can at some point go up to institutional investors or municipalities or governments and say, hey, we built this village. We actually, like, this is how much biodiversity we created. This is how much carbon we stored and so on. And then that becomes a leverage point to be able to drive more funding into these kind of technology-enabled regenerative villages.
Mm. So it's also like by using these kind of like newer or like maybe more technologically enabled ways of measuring impact, you're able to perhaps prepare yourself for the potential future that there is going to be maybe some type of market or some desire for people to be able to like want to fund these types of regenerative projects and practices. So you will be able to show like good data. I know I believe it's called MRV, measuring, reporting, and valuation. Is that right?
Yeah.
Validation? Which is basically the practice of people like saying like, "Hey, we planted whatever this many trees, this place, and we believe it's going to sequester this much carbon," type of thing. So you can like, so that people who want to support these types of projects can be more sure that the money that they're putting towards you is something that like has proven results for.
Exactly. And yeah, and I mean, and you can invest in reforestation projects and all these kind of things all around the world. I think the specificity of what we're bringing is, first of all, we're bringing a legal model to put land into
Mm.
conservation, which means that that is conservation for many decades or maybe centuries or millennia, who knows. And it's really trying to look at this kind of long-term impact. Um, and basically aligning our interests with that of nature and trying to create a market that can benefit the development of these type of regenerative villages in the future.
Yeah, fair. Um, and so uh, OASA is kind of like this, just to make the connection, like OASA is kind of like this entity that then is whose purpose is to steward multiple villages who all want to do similar things to be able to push that kind of general to make it not a one-off, I guess we can say, to make it something that is easy for plenty of other villages or just groups and collectives of people who want to do this type of work that TDF is kind of experimenting with, you say.
Yeah. And so the goal of OASA is to have a network of villages around the globe, around 10 to 12 villages, but that each of these villages is actually sitting within the context of a nature conservation that would be on much larger areas. So the goal is to conserve around 100,000 hectares globally that would be
Mm.
stewarded by OASA. So it's not like a one legal entity to fit all, but the idea is that we can create the first model, other people can then replicate it. Hopefully this becomes a trend. OASA is valuing its natural asset on its land, and it's enforcing decentralized governance of those spaces, empowering like a grassroots kind of village builders to be able to run, operate, co-own, co-steward their villages, the spaces they live, the spaces they work, the food they eat, and everything in between.
Yeah. And so maybe since we're nearing about the hour, we had a ReFi week, which was a week long event where we talked a lot about ReFi and the different goals that different people in their projects had. I'm curious if you have any thoughts that you want to share or any hot takes that you have about ReFi or regenerative finance, the current state of it, and where you hope it goes to in the future.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a very tough year for ReFi. It's been a tough year for us as well as a project. It was tough for crypto, but I think even more so for ReFi because carbon markets got slammed and crypto
Yeah.
got slammed. And yeah, it's just been difficult. But at the same time, if we look at like longer term, like 2030, 2040, 2050, I don't really see a world in which ReFi is not going to play a role. Like we need to coordinate around these issues or we're just going to go extinct within the next couple of generations. So I think it's quite inevitable and the interest is there. Like everyone literally wants this to happen from national governments to companies to all the consumers. Everyone knows that that has to be the norm. Um, and so, yeah, for me, it's like just, yeah, really interesting and fun to be playing on this frontier edge. And, during the ReFi week, we minted hypersets. So basically, it's like storing this proof, well, this trace on chain, saying what impact we left. And so we said, okay, all of these people who put in their wallet, who said, okay, they were part of the TDF ReFi week. We planted 700 trees, and this is all the data. You can actually go and look at it, and this is basically leaving a trace for the future, so we can go back retroactively and we can say, oh, actually, like this is all the impact that's been done in the past, and this is quite a change from current, say, carbon market and so on, where a lot of it is basically bullshit. Like a lot of it, the carbon credits currently they go to companies that have the ability to, for example, log entire forests in the Amazon because you need to have a real threat to the ecosystem in order to be able to claim the credits for it. So I think being able to store those little pieces of data on chain just about the impact that we are leaving all around the globe, and as that scales up and as we get more and more blockchain systems to track that, more and more AI system to verify these things, um, that opens up the space for actually a nature-backed economy where we are rewarding retroactively and also like in real time, hopefully, stewards for the care that they give to the land and for the ecosystem services that that land then provide back to us. And yeah, hopefully being able to create an economy that's producing more nature.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that I think ReFi will have to start to contend with is the kind of, I think, failures of current models for carbon markets. You had Vera, I think, had the scandals. Something like 90% of their carbon credits were bunk. Um, that is something that, of course, ReFi has been, as it exists so far, has largely been kind of like hooking on to the carbon credit markets, which is kind of one of the things that I wish they would not have, but I can see why they did because it already exists, and so it's easier. There are already like whatever APIs or something you can do with it. But there's like a very serious need if we want to take the question of climate change very seriously. That there has to be something else that is not like these carbon markets because clearly they're not working.
Mhm.
But yeah, so I think I look forward to there being more projects that are taking kind of like the reins in their hands and just starting to work on the earth directly where they can. Um, and so maybe just to close it off, would you like to share with people how maybe they can get involved with TDF and yeah, can they go there? Can they show up and begin planting trees if they want to?
Yeah, for sure. We're looking for residents for next year. We're doing months long co-living residencies from March to June. Um, Hoping that we're gonna have a ReFi month actually, maybe in May, still to be confirmed, still to be discussed. And yeah, working with partners like Regions Unite and so on and so on. And we have a bunch of different events around those topics. We're planting a microforest in March. We're doing cooking classes in April. So basically, every month there's going to be different little activities and ways that you can come and engage. And yeah, we have availability, so you can just go to our website and also feel free to reach out to me on social media if there's any questions.
Cool, sure, and I'll put some of those links in the show notes. But yeah, cool. Thanks a lot for coming on. And yeah, I had a really nice time at TDF. It was very nice to get away from my bubble of my computer and the digital world and be exposed to the elements for a bit and get my hands dirty. So I definitely recommend if you have the opportunity and you have the chance to go check out TDF. And you can also, I think maybe another thing maybe to add is that people can support you guys directly on your websites by having a subscription donation, which is what I did, so I can support the project.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, those subscriptions really help us to kind of keep the ground running, as it was a really hard year for crypto. That was not the easiest year to launch our token, and now we are looking to raise some funding in Q1 from more traditional sources. But in the meantime, any support is highly appreciated.
Yeah, cool. Well, thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
And now, like, sometimes